The world beyond our fence line was always there, waiting. Through 18 harvests, I'd watched it shimmer on the horizon like heat rising from August pavement, something that I could see but never touch. Until today. My fingers trembled slightly as I folded the small map my father had drawn. 3 creases, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, a trinity of folds that would guide me to the English world and back again. The weight of his words hung heavy in the morning air. Remember who you are, Eli. Remember where you come from. The bus smelled of synthetic fabric and coffee. I took a seat near the back, away from curious eyes that might linger too long on my plain clothes, my hat resting on my lap. The landscape outside the window transformed gradually, our orderly fields giving way to subdivisions, then strip malls, then finally the spires of downtown, reaching toward heaven like the corn we planted each spring, but made of glass and steel instead of living things. The city was louder than I had imagined. Not just in sound, though there was plenty of that, but in color and movement and light. Everything competed for attention. Signs flashed, horns blared, people brushed past with eyes fixed on glowing rectangles in their palms. I clutched my small leather satchel closer, feeling the reassuring shape of my journal inside. "You look lost," a woman said, pausing beside me at a crosswalk. Her hair was dyed a vibrant purple, and silver hoops lined the edge of one ear. "First time downtown?" I nodded, the words catching in my throat. Dad had taught me English, of course. We needed it for selling at market. But speaking to strangers still felt forbidden, though I knew it wasn't. Not during Rumspringa. "The art district is 2 blocks that way," she said, pointing. "Nice place to start." I thanked her quietly and followed her direction, guided more by instinct than understanding. The sidewalk eventually opened to a small cobblestone square where trees grew from circular cuts in the stone. Their branches stretched overhead, strung with tiny lights that would illuminate after sunset. Between the trunks stood weathered brick buildings with large windows, displaying paintings and sculptures I couldn't begin to comprehend. One storefront, smaller than the rest, caught my eye. The sign read simply, "Witnessed, Rural American Life Through the Years." In the window, a large black and white photograph showed a harvesting scene. Men in suspenders and broad-brimmed hats working together to bring in hay. My people. But not quite. I hesitated only a moment before pushing open the door. A small bell announced my arrival, and cool air washed over me. The gallery was dimly lit, with track lights focused on each framed photograph. 3 other visitors wandered between the images, speaking in hushed tones. I felt suddenly self-conscious in my homemade shower shirt and suspenders, like I had wandered onto a stage in the middle of someone else's play. But then I saw it, a photograph that stole my breath away. Sunrise over a cornfield, the golden light catching morning mist as it rose from the earth. The composition was simple, stalks reaching skyward in the foreground, and beyond them, the silhouette of a farmhouse and barn. It could have been my home. The same light I had witnessed hundreds of times while hitching our horses before dawn. Yet seeing it framed and hanging on a wall transformed it. The photographer had found something sacred in that ordinary moment, something I lived within but had never truly seen. "What do you think?" The voice came from behind me, soft but assured. I turned to find a young man watching me, his head tilted slightly. He wore a fitted black shirt that revealed the lines of his shoulders, and dark jeans that tapered to boots with more buckles than seemed necessary. His hair was cut short on the sides, but longer on top, falling across his forehead in a way that seemed both careless and deliberate. Words failed me. "It's home," I finally managed. His eyebrows lifted. "You live there?" "No, not there exactly, but somewhere like it." I gestured vaguely to the photograph. "The light is right. Most people don't notice how the mist catches it differently each morning." A smile spread across his face, revealing a small gap between his front teeth. "You have a good eye." He extended his hand. "I'm Daniel. These are my photographs." I stared at his offered hand for a heartbeat before remembering to take it. His grip was warm and firm, his palm smooth against my calluses. "Eli," I replied, withdrawing my hand perhaps too quickly. "Eli Yoder." Amish? He asked, and then immediately raised his palms in apology. Sorry, that's probably rude to ask outright. Yes, I said, finding myself smiling at his directness, though right now I'm on Rumspringa. His eyes lit with recognition. Running around? The time when you decide whether to join the church? I nodded, surprised at his knowledge. I did a whole series on Amish communities in Ohio a few years back, he explained, gesturing toward another wall of photographs. Never got as close as I wanted, though. Your people are private. We are, I agreed, then added softly, we have to be. Daniel studied me for a moment, then motioned toward the Cornfield photograph. Would you like to know how I captured this? I followed him to the image, and he began explaining apertures and exposures, words that meant nothing to me but carried in them a passion that was infectious. He spoke with his hands as much as his voice, fingers tracing light patterns in the air. The secret, he said, leaning close enough that I could smell cedarwood and something citrus on his skin, is patience. I waited 4 mornings for this exact quality of light. Most photographers would have settled for the first decent sunrise. We don't rush much, I said, on the farm. No, I don't imagine you do. His gaze traveled over my face in a way that made me feel both seen and exposed. Have you ever seen yourself through someone else's eyes, Eli? The question lingered between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't fully grasp. Before I could answer, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small card. My information, he said, extending it toward me, in case you want to see more photographs, or just talk about light. As I reached for the card, our fingers brushed. A small contact, barely there, yet it sent a current through me that made my chest tighten. I quickly slipped the card into my pocket, as though it might burn through the fabric if I held it too long. Thank you, I managed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. There's a cafe across the square, Daniel said, gesturing toward the window. I usually go there after closing up, around 6. They make good coffee. He paused. Do you drink coffee? Yes, I replied, though in truth I preferred the Mulder brew we made at home to the strong, bitter drink I'd smelled on the bus. Good. His smile returned, warm and easy. Maybe I'll see you there. I wandered through the rest of the gallery in a daze, barely registering the other photographs. My thoughts kept returning to Daniel's question. Have you ever seen yourself through someone else's eyes? The idea was unsettling. In our community, the individual matters little. We exist as part of the whole, like individual stalks in a field of wheat. To stand apart, to be singled out, even by a gaze, felt dangerous. Yet I found myself lingering, moving slowly between images, aware of Daniel speaking with other visitors across the room. I stole glances when I thought he wouldn't notice, studying the way he gestured, the easy laugh that sometimes escaped him, how he seemed completely comfortable in his skin in a way I had never experienced. By the time 6 o'clock approached, I had circled the small gallery 4 times. Several times I had nearly walked out the door, convincing myself to return to the bus station, to the safety of home and routine. But something held me there, some invisible thread drawing me toward this stranger who saw the world, my world, through such different eyes. The cafe was tucked between a bookshop and a store selling ceramic pottery. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a warm glow over mismatched tables and chairs. I chose a seat near the window, where I could watch people pace in the square. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I found myself smoothing my trousers repeatedly, a nervous habit my mother always gently corrected. You came! Daniel's voice startled me. He stood beside the table, now wearing a light jacket over his black shirt. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. He sat across from me, setting down 2 steaming mugs. I took a chance and ordered for both of us. Hope that's okay. It's chai, gentler than coffee. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something to hold. The spiced aroma rising from the mug was pleasant. Cinnamon and cloves, familiar smells from our kitchen at home. Tell me about your Rumspringa, Daniel said, blowing gently across his drink. Is it what you expected? I've only been away 3 days, I replied. Mostly, I've been staying with my cousin in Lancaster. He drove me to the bus station this morning. I paused. This is my first time in the city alone. And you found my little gallery, he mused, out of all the places you could have wandered. The woman with purple hair told me to go to the art district. Daniel laughed. Fate works in mysterious ways. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Or providence, I suppose you might say. I took a sip of the chai, letting the sweet warmth fill my mouth. We don't really believe in fate. God has a plan, but we have choice too. And what will you choose? He asked. After Rumspringa? The question hung between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. I don't know yet. That's the purpose of this time, to decide. But you have a life waiting for you, Daniel said. A community. That's more than most people have. Yes, I looked down at my hands, calloused and strong from years of farm work. But it's the only life I've known. A comfortable silence fell between us. Outside, the square had begun to fill with evening visitors. A street performer played guitar near the central fountain, the music filtering faintly through the cafe window. What about you? I finally asked. How did you become a photographer? Daniel's expression softened. I was always the kid with the camera. Started with my mom's old point and shoot when I was 9. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger. After high school, I tried college for a while, art school in Chicago. Dropped out after a year. Couldn't stand the theory classes, all that talk about deconstructing images. He shrugged. I just wanted to make them. So you traveled? Everywhere I could afford to go. Worked odd jobs, slept in my car sometimes. Followed the light. He smiled at some private memory. That's what photography is, really, capturing light. As he spoke, a strand of hair had fallen across his forehead. Without thinking, Daniel reached across the table and gently tucked it behind my ear, his fingers brushing my temple. The touch was so unexpected, so intimate, that I froze, heat rising to my face. Sorry, he said, withdrawing his hand quickly. Habit from my sister. She always had hair in her eyes. It's fine, I managed, though my skin still tingled where his fingers had been. We talked for another hour, about his photographs, about my family's farm, about the differences between our worlds. He spoke of traveling to Montana to photograph wild horses, of sleeping under desert stars in Arizona, of chasing storms across Oklahoma plains. Each story painted images so vivid I could almost see them, worlds of color and movement so different from the measured pace of my life. It must be hard, he said eventually, living with so many rules. We don't see them as restrictions, I explained. They're boundaries that create space for what matters. Faith, family, community. And what about discovery? Daniel leaned forward. New experiences? Finding out who you truly are? Those aren't our priorities, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. But they are yours, he observed quietly, or you wouldn't be here. The truth of it struck me silent. I had always been the curious one, asking questions that sometimes earned me stern looks from the elders. While my brothers seemed content within the rhythm of our lives, I had always sensed something waiting beyond the horizon, something unnamed that called to me in the moments between prayers and chores. It's getting late, I said finally, glancing at the darkening sky outside. I should find the bus back to Lancaster. I'll walk you to the station, Daniel offered, standing and leaving money on the table for our drinks. We walked in silence through the square, now lit by the string lights overhead and the glow from shop windows. The evening had grown cool, and I pulled my jacket closer around me. A light breeze carried the scent of someone's dinner, garlic and rosemary, from an open apartment window above. At the edge of the park, Daniel paused beneath a canopy of lights. The golden glow transformed his face, softening the sharp lines of his cheekbones, catching in his eyes. The light here, he said softly, looking up at the strands of tiny bulbs. It's nothing special, mass-produced, ordinary. His gaze returned to me. But the way it catches in your eyes makes it extraordinary. He took a half step closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You see miracles in places I never thought to look, he murmured. My breath caught. No one had ever spoken to me this way, with words that seemed to reach inside and touch something unnamed. I thought of home, the careful distance we kept from one another, the words left unspoken, emotions contained. Here, standing in the glow of electric lights, with this man who chased color and shadows across continents, I felt something inside me unraveling. What would my father say if he could see me now? My mother? The bishop? Their faces floated in my mind, overlaid with passages from scripture about temptation, about the narrow path. Guilt rose in my throat, sharp and bitter. Yet beneath the guilt was something else, a startling sense of recognition. As though I had been walking through my life with a veil before my eyes, and suddenly it had been lifted. I should go, I whispered, the words barely audible. I know, Daniel replied, making no move to continue walking. We stood frozen in that moment, suspended between his world and mine, between what was permitted and what was possible. The sounds of the city seemed to fade around us, leaving only the soft buzz of the lights overhead and the rhythm of our breathing, slightly out of sync. Will you come back? He asked, to the gallery. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm showing new work tomorrow, he said. Rural landscapes at dusk, the moments when day surrenders to night. He hesitated. There's one you might recognize, a barn silhouette against a purple sky. I think it might be near your community. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The bus station was only 3 blocks away. I could still make the last departure to Lancaster. My cousin would be waiting with his buggy to take me back to the safety of his home, where plain walls and scripture verses would remind me of who I was meant to be. I have to close the gallery, Daniel said finally. Last one out. We walked the remaining blocks to the station in silence. The terminal was nearly empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead, making everything look harsh and unreal after the golden glow of the square. This is me, I said, unnecessarily, gesturing to the doors. Eli. Daniel's voice was low, almost a whisper. He reached for my hand, his fingers closing around mine with gentle pressure. I should have pulled away. Every teaching, every sermon warned against such contact. But I remained still, heart thundering in my chest. Daniel turned my hand over, pressed his thumb into my palm in a slow, deliberate gesture that sent heat coursing up my arm. Then he lifted my hand, his lips hovering just above my skin, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel his warm breath. My lungs seemed to forget their purpose. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice. And then, darkness. The station's power cut out completely, plunging us into sudden night. Surprised voices rose around us. Someone laughed nervously. A security guard called out reassurances that the generators would kick in soon. In the darkness, Daniel's hand still held mine, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. I couldn't see his face, couldn't read his expression. But I could feel him, solid and real and so close. When the emergency lights finally blinked on, casting everything in a dim red glow, he had already stepped back, our connection broken. His eyes held mine for one more endless moment before he turned and walked away, disappearing through the terminal doors into the night beyond. I watched him go, my hand still tingling where he had touched it, my breath still caught somewhere between fear and wonder. The last bus to Lancaster would leave in 20 minutes. I had just enough time to buy a ticket, to return to the path that had been laid before me since birth, to choose the life I knew waited for me, honest work, a faithful wife, children raised in the old ways, safety, certainty, belonging. Or I could turn around, walk back through those doors, find my way back to the gallery where photographs hung like windows into other possible lives, where a man with artist's hands and searching eyes waited to close up for the night. The station's main lights flickered back on, harsh and revealing. I stood frozen between two worlds, the weight of 18 years pressing on one shoulder, the feather touch of possibility on the other. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know which way to turn. The generators hummed back to life. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, harsh and unforgiving after the intimate darkness. Around me, travelers resumed their hurried movements, the brief communion of shared darkness already forgotten. But I remained still, my hand suspended in the air where Daniel had released it, the ghost of his almost touch lingering on my skin. The last bus to Lancaster idled at the platform, its engine growling impatiently. The driver stood by the open door, checking his watch. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, to decide. I thought of my cousin waiting with his buggy, of the small spare room prepared for me in his home. I thought of my father's weathered face as he had handed me the carefully folded map, his eyes holding mine a moment longer than usual. "Remember who you are," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We stood looking at each other across the small space, both frozen in the moment, me in my plain clothes that marked me as separate, him in his artistic simplicity. Around us, festival-goers moved in colorful streams, their conversations a distant murmur that seemed to fade as our eyes held. I took a hesitant step forward. "I got your letter. I wasn't sure you would." He made no move toward me, giving me space to retreat if I needed to. "I'm glad you came." I glanced at the photographs displayed around the tent, new images I hadn't seen before. Landscapes bathed in the particular golden light that comes just after a summer rain. An abandoned barn being reclaimed by wildflowers and climbing vines. And there, on the far panel, a series of images from the lot behind the gallery, the morning light transforming weeds and broken concrete into something almost sacred. "These are beautiful," I said, moving toward them, grateful for the momentary distraction. "I went back there every morning for a week after you left," Daniel said, following me but keeping a careful distance, trying to capture what I saw when we were there together. But something was missing. I turned to face him. "What?" "Yubertin," he said simply. The word hung between us, its honesty stripping away all pretense. I felt myself trembling slightly, afraid of what might happen next, more afraid of what might not. "I can't stay long," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I told my mother I was looking at a horse." Daniel nodded, understanding what I couldn't say, that I had lied to be here, that I was risking much even for this brief encounter. "There's a path behind the tents," he said. "It leads up to an old tobacco barn. I've been taking some shots there in the evenings. The light on the weathered wood is incredible." He hesitated. "Would you like to see it?" I knew I should say no, should make some excuse and return to the safety of home and routine, but I found myself nodding. We walked together up the narrow dirt path, close but not touching, aware of other festival-goers who might see us. The barn came into view as we crested a small hill, a weathered structure with vertical slats spaced to allow airflow, its roof missing in places, golden light spilling through the gaps. "It's been abandoned for years," Daniel explained as we approached. "The festival organizers keep meaning to tear it down, but I convinced them to let it stand for one more season. For the photography." We stepped inside, and I was immediately struck by the quality of light, how it fell in distinct shafts through the open roof and slatted walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. The earthy scent of old wood and soil filled my nostrils, oddly comforting in its familiarity. "There's a platform up there," Daniel said, pointing to a rickety balcony that must once have been used for hanging tobacco to dry. "The view of the sunset is amazing." He led the way up a narrow wooden ladder, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. I followed cautiously, aware of the aged wood creaking beneath us. The balcony was little more than a ledge, just wide enough for two people to stand side by side, overlooking the interior of the barn, and, through large gaps in the wall, the rolling hills beyond. "We should be careful," I said, eyeing the weathered boards beneath our feet. "It doesn't look very stable." "It's stronger than it looks," Daniel replied, "like a lot of old things." We stood at the edge, shoulders nearly touching, watching the late afternoon light angle through the barn's western wall. Below us, the festival continued, distant music and laughter floating up on the warm breeze that stirred through the open structure. "I've been thinking about you," Daniel said after a long silence. "About what you said that night at the gallery, that you've always felt different, set apart." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I felt that way too, growing up," he continued, "like I was watching my life through a viewfinder, always adjusting the focus, but never quite part of the scene." He turned to look at me. "Until I found photography. It gave me a way to connect with the world, even if I was still standing slightly outside it. I have the farm, I said. My family, my faith. It should be enough. But it isn't. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I want, I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Can I really leave behind everything I've ever known? Can I be the person you deserve? Daniel's expression softened. I'm not asking you to be anyone but yourself, Eli. And who is that? I asked, the question that had haunted me since our first meeting finally finding voice. I don't even know anymore. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he spoke, his voice gentle but sure. You're someone who notices the way light catches morning mist, who walks 5 miles to see photographs, who recognizes beauty in ordinary places. He paused, who makes me feel, for the first time, like I'm no longer just an observer. I turned to him, startled by the confession. What do you mean? All my life, I've been on the outside looking in, he said. Capturing moments but never fully living them. With you. He seemed to search for the right words. With you, I want to put the camera down. I want to step into the frame. The simplicity of his admission undid me. Without conscious thought, I reached for his hand, my fingers closing around his with a certainty that belied all my doubts. His skin was warm against mine, the contact sending that now familiar current through my body. Eli, he whispered, his free hand coming up to gently touch my cheek. There in the golden light of the tobacco barn, with dust motes swirling around us like stars, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question rather than a statement. But when Daniel responded, his mouth soft and yielding against mine, it deepened into something desperate and necessary, as though we were both drowning and had finally found air. His arms encircled me, drawing me closer. I felt the solid warmth of his chest against mine, the slight roughness of stubble against my smooth cheek, the beat of his heart keeping time with my own. For the first time in my life, I felt fully present in my body, aware of every sensation, every point of contact between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, I rested my forehead against his, unable to step away, unwilling to break the connection between us. I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you standing in front of that Cornfield photograph, Daniel murmured, looking at your own world made strange. A shadow passed across my mind, the memory of Sunday sermons, of stern warnings against the very feelings now coursing through me. I pulled back slightly, reality intruding on the perfect moment. My family, I said, the words catching in my throat. My community, if they knew. I know, Daniel replied, his eyes full of understanding. I'm not asking you to choose, not yet. Then what are you asking? He considered for a moment. Just don't disappear. Don't go back to your world and pretend this never happened. His hand found mine again, squeezing gently. Give yourself time to know what you really want. Below us, the festival sounds had begun to change. Vendors calling out final sales, the music winding down, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the hills in gold and amber. I should go, I said reluctantly. They'll be expecting me home for evening prayers. Daniel nodded, releasing my hand. I understand. We descended the ladder carefully, each rung bringing me closer to the decision that waited at the bottom. As we stepped out of the barn into the slanting evening light, Daniel reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I want you to have this, he said, pressing it into my hands. I opened it to find page after page of sketches, fields at dawn, mist-covered rivers, abandoned buildings reclaimed by nature. And there, near the back, a careful pencil drawing of my face. Eyes looking directly out from the page with an openness I scarcely recognized in myself. I've never given one of my sketchbooks to anyone, Daniel said quietly, but I want you to have this piece of me. To remember. I traced my fingers over the drawing, touched beyond words by the gift, by what it represented. Thank you. We walked back toward the festival grounds in silence, both aware that our time was running short. At the edge of the meadow, where the path split, one way leading back to the tents, the other toward the road that would take me home, we stopped. The festival runs through Sunday, Daniel said, his eyes searching mine. I'll be here. I nodded, clutching the sketchbook to my chest. I don't know if I can come back. I understand. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Eli, whatever you decide about your life, your faith, your future, I want you to know that there's a place for you in my world. If you want it. He reached out, his fingers lightly touching the sketchbook in my hands. If you ever choose freedom over fear, come find me here. He smiled, though his eyes held a sadness that pierced me. I'll be watching the light change and thinking of you. I stood frozen, unable to move toward him, unable to turn away. The sunlight caught in his hair, turning the brown strands to copper and gold. Behind him, the festival was dismantling for the day, tents being closed, artwork carefully packed away. Two worlds, side by side but separate. Goodbye, Daniel, I whispered. Not goodbye, he corrected gently. Just until. He turned and walked back toward his tent, his figure gradually blending with the others in the distance. I remained at the crossroads, the sketchbook heavy in my hands, my heart pounding with emotions I had no names for in my language. The cornfield stretched before me, golden in the evening light, the familiar silhouettes of silos and barns marking the boundary of my world. Behind me, music still drifted faintly from the festival grounds, a melody I didn't recognize, but that spoke of possibilities I had never allowed myself to imagine. I took one step, then another, toward home. As I walked, I felt the weight of the sketchbook against my chest, each beat of my heart an echo of Daniel's words. If you ever choose freedom over fear, come find me here. The corn stood tall around me, whispering secrets in the summer breeze, while the setting sun painted the sky in colors I now saw through different eyes. His eyes. Somewhere between the fields I had always known and the world that had opened before me. I walked alone, carrying the burden and the blessing of choice. He had said, who was I? For 18 years, I had known the answer to that question. Eli Yoder, second son of Samuel and Ruth, member of the Grofdale Conference, future farmer, future husband, future father. My life mapped out in orderly rows, like the fields we planted each spring. But now, standing in that sterile bus terminal with the press of Daniel's thumb still warm in my palm, I wasn't certain anymore. Before I could think too deeply about what I was doing, I turned away from the departing bus and walked back through the terminal doors. The night air hit me like a blessing, cool and damp against my flushed skin. I stood for a moment, breathing it in, letting it calm the wild thudding of my heart. I had no map for what came next. No carefully folded paper to guide me through these unfamiliar streets. But I remembered the way back to the gallery, past the city park with its string lights, through the cobblestone square with the weathered brick buildings. I began walking, each step carrying me further from the certainty of home and deeper into unfamiliar territory. The gallery windows were dark when I arrived, but a dim light glowed from the back room. I hesitated on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure. What was I doing here? What would I say when he opened the door? Before I could retreat, the gallery door swung open. Daniel stood in the threshold, keys in hand, clearly preparing to leave. He froze when he saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, more vulnerable. Eli, he said, my name a question and an answer all at once. I missed the bus, I replied, though we both knew it wasn't true. He nodded slowly, as if carefully considering his next words. I need to lock up here, he said finally. But afterward. Yes, I said, the word escaping before I could catch it. Wait here. I stood on the sidewalk while he finished closing the gallery, straightening frames that needed no straightening, adjusting lights that were already off. Through the window, I could see him moving slowly, deliberately, as though buying time to compose himself. Or perhaps giving me time to change my mind, to disappear back into the night. When he finally emerged, he had a messenger bag slung across his chest and a battered leather jacket thrown over his shoulders. Hungry? He asked. I shook my head. The chai still sat warm in my stomach, mingled with a nervousness that left no room for appetite. Good, he said, because I want to show you something. We walked in silence through streets that grew progressively quieter, moving away from the bustling downtown into what appeared to be an older industrial area. Abandoned warehouses loomed against the night sky, their windows dark and empty. Graffiti marked their brick walls, strange, curving symbols and words I didn't understand. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Trust me," Daniel replied, glancing back with a small smile. "It's just up ahead." We turned down a narrow alley between two warehouses, then through a chain-link fence with a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Beyond it lay what must have once been a loading zone, but was now an overgrown lot, reclaimed by nature. Tall grasses and wildflowers had pushed through cracks in the concrete. At the far end stood the skeleton of what might have been a small utility shed, now just 4 posts and part of a roof. "I found this place my first week in the city," Daniel said, leading me toward the dilapidated structure. "I was wandering around with my camera at dawn, looking for urban decay shots, the usual cliché stuff. But then I saw this." He gestured to the lot around us, and in the faint moonlight, I could see what had drawn him here. Despite being in the heart of the city, the abandoned space had a wild beauty to it, untamed greenery reclaiming the industrial landscape, stubbornly growing where it didn't belong. "In spring, wildflowers bloom all through here," he continued. "The light at dawn is incredible. It's like finding a secret garden hidden inside all this concrete." We reached the remains of the shed, and Daniel pulled a small battery-powered lantern from his bag, switching it on to cast a soft glow around us. He cleared a space on what remained of the wooden floor and sat down, patting the spot beside him. I lowered myself carefully onto the weathered boards, keeping a cautious distance between us. The lantern light caught the angles of his face, throwing half of it into shadow. "Why did you come back?" he asked softly. I stared down at my hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know," I admitted. "Yes, you do." His voice was gentle, but insistent. I took a deep breath, trying to find words for the feelings that churned inside me. "There's something about the way you see the world," I finally said. "In your photographs, it's like you notice things other people miss." "That's just photography," he said. "No." I shook my head. "It's more than that. You see beauty in ordinary places, in cornfields and barns, and people like me." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a sketchbook and a small tin of pencils. "Not many people know this," he said, opening the book to a blank page. "But before photography, I drew. Still do sometimes when I want to really see something." He glanced up at me. "Would you mind if I swallowed hard, understanding his unfinished question. "I should be getting back to my cousins," I said, but made no move to leave. "Just a quick sketch," he promised. "The light is perfect right now." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Stay just like that," he instructed, pencil already moving across the page. "Look out toward where the moon is hitting those tall grasses." I turned my gaze where he directed, hyper-aware of his eyes on me, of the soft scratching of pencil on paper. No one had ever drawn me before. In our community, we didn't hang portraits or keep photographs. Pride of appearance was discouraged. Yet here was Daniel, capturing my likeness with careful strokes, preserving what God had made to be temporary. "Why did you become a photographer?" I asked, needing to break the intimate silence. Daniel's pencil continued its steady movement. "I told you, I've always seen the world that way." "But why? What makes you want to capture moments like that, to keep them?" He paused, considering. "I guess I've always been afraid of losing things. People, moments." His pencil resumed its work. "My father left when I was 8. Just packed up one night and disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation." I turned to look at him, forgetting I was supposed to stay still. "No, don't move," he said gently. "I'm almost done." I returned my gaze to the moonlit grasses. "I'm sorry about your father. It was a long time ago." He shrugged, but I could hear the old hurt in his voice. "After he left, I started taking pictures of everything, like I could somehow hold on to moments if I captured them on film." "Stupid. No. It's not stupid," I said softly. What about you? He asked. Why did you really come on Rumspringa? Most Amish youth I met during my project stayed pretty close to home, hung out with other Amish kids. You're out here alone in the city. I considered his question carefully. I've always felt different, I admitted, not in a way I could name. Just like I was looking at my life through a window, watching it happen to someone else. Daniel's pencil stilled. And now? Now I'm here, I said simply. He closed his sketchbook without showing me what he'd drawn. It's getting late, he said. You should probably head back to your cousin's place. He'll be worried. Though disappointment washed through me, I nodded. He was right. My cousin would be concerned, perhaps even ready to alert my parents if I didn't return tonight. Will you come back tomorrow? Daniel asked, standing and offering his hand to help me up. To the gallery, I mean, for the new exhibition. I hesitated only briefly before holding his offered hand. Yes, I said. What time? Dawn, he replied, his fingers warm around mine. Meet me here, actually. There's something I want to show you before the gallery opens. I should have said no. Should have told him I would meet him at a reasonable hour, at the gallery with other people around. But the thought of seeing this place in the first light of day, with him, made my pulse quicken. Dawn, I agreed. He walked me back to the main road and insisted on waiting until I was safely in a taxi. As the car pulled away, I looked back to see him standing under a streetlight, his face tilted up toward the night sky, as though searching for stars behind the city's haze. My cousin was still awake when I arrived at his modest home on the outskirts of Lancaster, his face tight with worry. I was about to call your father, he said, relief evident in his voice. Where have you been? Exploring the city, I replied vaguely. I lost track of time. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, accepting my explanation. There's cold chicken in the icebox if you're hungry. Thank you, I said, though food was the furthest thing from my mind. I think I'll just go to bed. In the small guest room, I lay on the narrow bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face in the lantern light, felt the ghost touch of his breath against my hand. What was happening to me? Was this God's test? To show me the temptations of the English world so I could reject them and return to the fold stronger in my faith? Or was it something else entirely? A door opening to a life I hadn't known was possible. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, pale pre-dawn light was filtering through the simple curtains. I slipped out of bed and dressed quietly, careful not to wake my cousin or his wife. I left a brief note saying I had gone back to the city to see more museums, promising to return by evening prayers. The lie settled uncomfortably in my stomach as I waited at the nearby bus stop, watching the sun's first rays touch the distant hills. The morning bus was nearly empty, just a few sleepy workers with travel mugs of coffee, barely glancing up as I took a seat near the back. By the time we reached the city, the sky had lightened to a pearl gray. I found my way back to the industrial area more easily than I expected, my feet remembering the path we had walked the night before. The gap in the fence seemed to be waiting for me. Beyond it, the abandoned lot was transformed in the early light. Dew sparkled on every blade of grass, and wisps of mist curled around the concrete foundations like living things. Daniel was already there, sitting on the remnants of the shed floor, his camera in his lap and a thermos beside him. He looked up as I approached, his face breaking into a smile that made my chest tighten. You came, he said. I said I would. He patted the space beside him. The show's about to start. I sat next to him, closer than I had the night before. The morning was cool, and I could feel the warmth of his body, even through the inches that separated us. Watch, he whispered. As the sun crested the edge of the eastern warehouse, its first rays shot through the mist that clung to the stalks of the wild grasses. The entire lot was suddenly illuminated, each dewdrop becoming a prism that scattered light in tiny rainbows. The concrete, gray and lifeless by night, now revealed subtle variations of color, rust reds, moss greens, the blue-gray of lichen. Daniel lifted his camera and began shooting, the soft click of the shutter like a heartbeat in the morning stillness. I watched his hands as they moved, strong and certain, adjusting settings with practiced ease. "It's beautiful," I murmured. He lowered his camera and turned to me, his eyes reflecting the golden light. "I've spent my life chasing light," he said softly, "from the Grand Canyon at sunset to Venetian canals at midnight. But you've shown me shadows can be beautiful too." "Me?" I asked, confused. "Your world," he clarified. "The Amish communities I photographed. There's a simplicity there, a quietness that I've never found anywhere else. Like you've all figured out something the rest of us are still searching for." I thought of home, the pre-dawn milkings, the silent prayers before meals, the rhythm of days that flowed one into another like water in a gentle stream. There was beauty in that simplicity, yes, but also confinement. "It's not perfect," I said quietly. "Nothing is." Daniel set his camera down and reached for the thermos. "Coffee?" I nodded, and he poured the steaming liquid into the thermos cap, handing it to me carefully. Our fingers brushed, and I felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. "So tell me," he said, watching me sip the strong brew, "what isn't perfect about your world?" I stared into the coffee, gathering my thoughts. We're taught that pride is a sin, that humility and submission to God's will are the path to salvation. And I believe that, I added quickly. But sometimes, I wonder if God's will for me might be different than what the elders say it is. How so? I hesitated, uncertain how to explain feelings I barely understood myself. I've always felt set apart somehow, like I was meant for something else, something more. More than farming? Daniel asked. Marriage, children? Maybe not more, I corrected myself. Just different. He nodded slowly. I understand. Different. The way he said it, soft, with a weight of experience behind it, made me wonder just how much he did understand. We sat in companionable silence for a while, passing the coffee between us, watching the mist gradually burn away as the sun climbed higher. I should show you the new exhibition, Daniel said eventually. I have to be at the gallery by 8 to finish setting up. We made our way back through the city streets, now coming alive with morning commuters. Daniel walked close beside me, occasionally pointing out architectural details I might have missed. A carved stone face above a doorway, an ornate iron fence, a hidden courtyard glimpsed through an archway. His city was a place of secret beauty, of stories layered one atop another, like the sedimentary rock formations he had photographed in Arizona. The gallery was still closed when we arrived, but Daniel unlocked it and ushered me inside. The lighting was different from the previous day, softer, more diffuse, creating pools of illumination around each photograph rather than spotlighting them. These are the new pieces, he said, leading me to a wall where several large prints hung. Rural landscapes at dusk and dawn, the in-between moments. I moved slowly along the wall, studying each image. Unlike the stark black and white photographs from yesterday, these were in color, but muted, dreamlike colors that captured the subtle shifts of light between day and night. A misty field at first light, a country road disappearing into blue shadows. And then, that's our community, I said softly, stopping before a photograph of a weathered barn silhouetted against a purple-pink sky. I recognized the distinctive shape of its roof, the lightning rod at its peak, bent slightly from a storm years ago. That's the Stoltzfus farm. How did you? I told you I did a project on Amish communities, Daniel replied, coming to stand beside me. This was taken about 4 years ago. I camped out in that field for 3 nights, waiting for the perfect dusk light. I studied the image, seeing my familiar world through his eyes. The barn I had passed 1,000 times without really looking at it was transformed in his photograph. No longer just a utilitarian structure, but something almost sacred, its simple lines cutting a perfect dark shape against the luminous sky. It's strange, I said, seeing places I know through your lens, like you're showing me something that was there all along, but I never noticed. That's what art does, Daniel replied. It makes the familiar strange, and the strange familiar. He was standing very close now, his shoulder nearly touching mine. I could smell that same cedar and citrus scent from yesterday, mixed with coffee and morning air. "The exhibition opens at 10, he said, but I thought maybe you'd like to see something else first." Before I could answer, the gallery door opened and a woman entered, middle-aged, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Daniel," she exclaimed, "you're here early, and you've brought a friend?" "Margaret," Daniel replied, stepping slightly away from me. "This is Eli. He's interested in rural photography." "How lovely." She extended her hand, which I shook awkwardly. "I'm the gallery owner. Any friend of Daniel's is welcome here." There was something knowing in her smile that made me glance away, afraid she might read too much in my expression. "Eli's from an Amish community," Daniel explained. "He's on Rumspringa." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "Fascinating. You must tell me all about it. I've always been intrigued by the Amish way of life. So different from our hectic modern existence." For the next hour, I found myself answering Margaret's well-intentioned but sometimes intrusive questions about my family, our traditions, our beliefs. Daniel stayed nearby, occasionally steering the conversation away from topics that seemed to make me uncomfortable. I was grateful for his perception, for the way he seemed to understand my unspoken boundaries. Other gallery employees arrived, and soon the space was bustling with preparation for the exhibition opening. Daniel was pulled away to help with last-minute adjustments, leaving me to wander the gallery alone. I found myself returning to the photograph of the Stoltzfus barn, drawn to the way it straddled my world and his, familiar yet transformed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to find an elderly man standing beside me, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. "Yes," I agreed. "Are you Amish?" he asked, his eyes taking in my plain clothes. "Yes, sir," he nodded thoughtfully. "I grew up near an Amish community in Ohio. Good people. Salt of the earth." He gestured to the photograph with his cane. "The young man who took this has a special eye. He sees beyond the surface." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak about Daniel to this stranger. "Too bad about his situation," the old man continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Talented as he is." My pulse quickened. "His situation?" The man glanced around, then leaned closer. "You know, his lifestyle." He made a vague gesture with his hand. "Not that I have anything against it, mind you. Different times we live in now. But still, a shame." Before I could ask what he meant, Daniel appeared at my elbow. "Eli," he said, his voice tight. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" He led me to the back room of the gallery, closing the door behind us. It was a small space filled with packing materials, extra frames, and a desk covered in paperwork. "I'm sorry about that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Harold is a regular patron, but he's from another generation. He doesn't always think before he speaks." "What did he mean?" I asked, though I think I already knew. "About your lifestyle?" Daniel looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. "I'm gay, Eli. I thought you understood that." The English word was familiar. I had heard it during previous Rumspringas from other youth who had ventured into the cities. But hearing Daniel say it, apply it to himself, made it suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. I struggled to find words. "I should go." Daniel's face fell, but he nodded. "I understand." "No," I said quickly. I'm not." I took a deep breath. "I need time to think." Something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I left the gallery without saying goodbye to Margaret or the other employees, needing air, space, distance to process what he had learned. Not that it was truly new information. Some part of me had known from the moment our eyes first met, from the way my body responded to his touch, his voice, his gaze. But hearing it spoken aloud made it impossible to ignore. I walked for hours, crisscrossing the city without direction or purpose. By mid-afternoon, I found myself in a small public park, sitting on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Children played on nearby swings, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. An elderly couple fed crumbs to strutting pigeons. Normal life continuing all around me while my world tilted on its axis. In our community, men like Daniel, men like me, did not exist. Or if they did, they kept themselves hidden, married dutifully, fathered children, and carried their secret to the grave. It was not something we spoke of, not something acknowledged in sermons or discussions of right living. But here in the English world, Harold had spoken of it casually, disapprovingly, but without shock. Different times, he had said, as though it were merely a matter of changing fashion rather than eternal damnation. I closed my eyes, trying to pray, to find God's guidance in the confusion that whirled inside me. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I kept seeing Daniel's face in the lantern light, feeling his thumb pressed into my palm, hearing his voice. "You've shown me shadows can be beautiful too." By the time I made my way back to my cousin's house, the sun was setting. He was sitting on the porch, his expression grave. "Your parents called," he said without preamble. "Your mother is worried. She said you haven't written." Guilt washed over me. In the whirlwind of the past 2 days, I hadn't given a thought to my family waiting for news of my Rumspringa. "I'll write tonight," I promised. "They're sending your brother to bring you home," he continued. "Your father hurt his back lifting a beam. They need help with the spring planting." I nodded, trying to hide the dismay that flooded through me. "When?" "Day after tomorrow." My cousin studied my face. "Unless you want to stay longer, I could call and tell them you found work here." For a moment, I was tempted to accept his offer, to buy more time in this world where I had glimpsed a different kind of life. But the thought of my father in pain, of the fields waiting to be planted, pulled at the sense of duty ingrained in me since childhood. "No," I said finally. "I'll go home." That night, I wrote a careful letter to my parents, describing my visit to the city in terms I knew would reassure them. The museums I had seen, the historic sites, careful observations about English farming methods compared to our own. I made no mention of Daniel, of the gallery, of the abandoned lot where wild beauty grew from concrete. The next morning, I rose before dawn again, leaving another note for my cousin. This time, it wasn't entirely a lie. I did intend to see one more museum before returning. But first, I needed to say goodbye. Daniel wasn't at the gallery when I arrived. Margaret, arranging flowers in a vase by the reception desk, looked up in surprise. "Eli, I didn't expect to see you today. Did you forget something yesterday?" "Is Daniel here?" I asked. She shook her head. "He doesn't come in until afternoon on Wednesdays, but I can give him a message if you'd like." I hesitated, then reached into my pocket for the small notebook I always carried. Tearing out a page, I wrote down my family's address and my name, then folded it carefully. "Could you give him this?" I handed her the paper. "And tell him I'm going home." Margaret's eyes softened with understanding. "I'll make sure he gets it," she promised. I spent the rest of the day as I had told my parents I would, wandering through the city's museums, looking at artifacts from distant places and times. But my mind wasn't on ancient pottery or medieval armor. It kept returning to that abandoned lot at dawn, to the way the light had caught in Daniel's eyes as he'd lowered his camera. When I returned to my cousin's house that evening, I found him sitting with another man at the kitchen table, Jacob, my older brother who had come to take me home. "Eli," he greeted me with a firm handshake that turned into a brief embrace. "It's good to see you." "You too," I replied, noticing how tired he looked. "How is Dad?" "Better. The doctor gave him something for the pain, but the planting won't wait." We set out for home early the next morning, Jacob driving our family's buggy with me beside him. The journey would take most of the day, following the back roads that wound through farmland, still waking from winter's sleep. "So," Jacob said after we had traveled for about an hour, "how was the English world?" I considered my answer carefully. "Different," I said finally. "Faster, louder, but interesting." "Did you meet anyone?" he asked, his tone casual. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "You know." He gave me a sidelong glance. "A girl, huh?" Relief and disappointment coursed through me in equal measure. "No," I said truthfully. No girls. Jacob nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Less temptation to stray. We rode in silence for a while, the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves marking time. I watched the familiar landscape pass by. Neat farms with freshly plowed fields, clotheslines heavy with washing, children in dark clothes playing in yards. My world, the only world I had known until 3 days ago. Did you ever think about not coming back? I asked suddenly. During your Rumspringa? Jacob looked surprised by the question. No, he said after a moment. Why would I? Everything I need is here. But weren't you curious about what else might be out there? He shrugged. I saw enough to know I didn't want it. All that noise and hurry. People living without God's guidance, without community. He glanced at me again, his brow furrowed. Why? Are you having doubts? No, I said quickly, just wondering. But as we continued homeward, I couldn't stop the questions that tumbled through my mind. What would happen if I did have doubts, if I chose a different path? Would I be cut off completely from my family, my community? Would I be able to build a new life from nothing in a world I barely understood? We arrived home just as dusk was settling over the valley. The familiar silhouette of our farmhouse and barn against the darkening sky made my throat tighten with emotion. Nothing had changed in my absence. The same weathered porch, the same neatly swept yard, the same lantern light glowing in the windows. My mother was the first to greet us, rushing onto the porch with a dish towel still in her hands. Eli, she exclaimed, embracing me tightly. Let me look at you. She held me at arm's length, her eyes scanning my face as though searching for changes the English world might have wrought in me. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she smiled and pulled me close again. Come in, your father is waiting and supper is almost ready. Inside, everything was as I remembered. The simple wooden furniture, the kerosene lamps casting warm pools of light, the lingering smell of my mother's bread. My father sat in his usual chair, his face lined with pain, but brightening when I entered. Welcome home, son, he said, extending his hand. I gripped it firmly, noticing how the skin felt rougher than I remembered, the veins more prominent. It's good to be back, Dad. It wasn't entirely a lie. There was comfort in the familiar, in knowing exactly what was expected of me, in the rhythms of family and faith that had shaped my life. But even as I sat at the table, bowing my head for the silent prayer before our meal, I felt something new inside me, a hollow space that echoed with questions I couldn't voice, with longings I had no words for. Life quickly fell back into its usual patterns. I rose before dawn to help with chores, spent long days in the fields beside my father and brothers, preparing the soil and planting the crops that would feed us through the coming winter. The work was hard but satisfying, and if I sometimes found my mind wandering to city streets and gallery lights, I pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the tasks at hand. But the dreams were harder to control. Night after night, I woke from visions of Daniel. His smile in the lantern light, his fingers brushing my temple as he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His voice murmuring, "You see miracles in places I never thought to look." 2 weeks after my return, a letter arrived. My mother handed it to me with a curious expression. From Lancaster, she said. Your cousin's wife, perhaps? The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, neat but with a slight artistic flourish. I tucked it into my pocket, waiting until I was alone in the barn that evening to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and folded within it, a small pencil sketch, my own face, looking out across the abandoned lot at dawn, light catching in my eyes, and along the curve of my jaw. Beneath it, Daniel had written, "The view I wish I could photograph." His letter was brief. Eli, I understand why you left, and I respect your decision. But I wanted you to know that these past days have changed me in ways I can't fully explain. You showed me a different kind of beauty, quieter, deeper, more enduring than what I've been chasing all these years. If you ever find yourself looking for light beyond the fields you know, my door is open. No expectations, no pressure. Just a friend who sees you, all of you, and finds that vision beautiful. Until then, I'll be watching dawns and remembering. Daniel P.S. I'm showing at the Willowbank Art Festival next month. It's not far from your community, just beyond the covered bridge on Mill Creek Road. June 12th to 14. In case you're curious about what I've been capturing lately. I read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and the sketch together. My hands were shaking slightly as I tucked them inside my journal, hidden between pages filled with observations about planting conditions and weather patterns. For the next 2 weeks, I carried that letter like a coal in my pocket, its weight both burden and warmth. During Sunday service, as the bishop spoke of worldly temptations and the narrow path to salvation, I found myself staring at my hands, remembering the press of Daniel's thumb against my palm. During meals, as my family discussed the coming harvest and plans for barn repairs, I was only half present, part of me still standing in that abandoned lot at dawn, watching light transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. I made no conscious decision to go to the festival, but on the morning of June 12th, I rose even earlier than usual, completed my chores with efficient haste, and told my mother I was going to check on a horse we were considering purchasing from a farm near Mill Creek. The guilt of the lie sat heavily on me as I walked the 5 miles to the festival grounds, but alongside it was a fluttering anticipation I couldn't suppress, a lightness in my step despite the moral weight I carried. The Willowbank Art Festival was larger than I expected. White tents scattered across a grassy meadow, colorful flags fluttering in the summer breeze, the smell of food cooking, the sound of acoustic music drifting on the air. I moved through the crowd self-consciously, aware of how my plain clothes stood out among the bright summer fashions of the English visitors. I found Daniel's tent near the back of the festival, slightly apart from the busier food and crafts areas. It was open on 3 sides, with photographs hanging on panels and more displayed in portfolios on a central table. And there, adjusting the angle of a frame, was Daniel. He looked different in the full sunlight, his skin more golden, his movements more relaxed. He wore a simple white t-shirt and faded jeans, his hair slightly longer than I remembered. Beautiful, in a way I had not allowed myself to fully acknowledge before. I stood frozen at the edge of the tent, suddenly unsure. What was I doing here? What did I expect would happen? What could possibly come of this? A photographer who traveled the world chasing light, and an Amish farm boy bound by centuries of tradition. Before I could retreat, Daniel turned and saw me. His expression shifted from surprise to a joy so unguarded, so complete, that it took my breath away.